Hi, everyone. I am Cory Lee, the content manager here at HonDiscover. And today I'm going to be joined by a very close friend of mine. She is an award-winning travel blogger, a travel agent, and a serial entrepreneur. I am so excited to welcome Sylvia Longmire. Hey, Sylvia. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to delve into travel and everything else that you're doing. I know you're like one of the busiest people that I know. We definitely have a lot to talk about today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for joining us. And to start us out, can you kind of talk about, before we get into all the fun stuff, all the travel stuff, can you tell us about when you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and what your life was like before being diagnosed?
Sure. So I was 38 years old in 2005 when I was diagnosed with MS. I was on active duty in the Air Force, working as a special agent, which is like the FBI of the Air Force, I guess you could say. I had just gotten married, and now I've had MS for 16 years. Divorced now. I have two sons. My older son is almost 13 and now 12. Now 12 and will be 13. My youngest son is 10. There they are. Yay, Jackson and PJ. I was medically retired from the Air Force in 2005. And then I started working as a contractor, as a subject matter expert on Mexico's drug war and border security. I still do that today. And then after I moved back to Florida in 2015, I started traveling again after a long hiatus. And actually, Cory was my inspiration. I wanted to go to Iceland, and I was looking at his blog posts about Iceland. And I said, wow, if Cory can do this, let me give this a try and see if I can do it. And shortly after that, and a few more trips, again, he was in my inspiration to start my own blog, Spin the Globe. And I've been going now ever since late 2015, early 2016 with the blog. And I've started a few endeavors since then, moving into on-screen acting and voice acting. And now I'm developing an animated short film about a little girl with a disability. So it's been a kind of a crazy ride.
Yeah, awesome. And when you got diagnosed with MS, what was that pivoting process like to, go from I guess being in the Air Force and then to completely change careers? Can you just talk a little bit about mentally what that was like and how that happened?
Sure. I've had quite a few major pivots in my life, and so I guess I shouldn't be surprised that this one came about. I started having symptoms in 2003. Multiple sclerosis takes a while sometimes to diagnose because you have to check so many boxes when it comes to different symptoms in different parts of your body spread out by a certain amount of time. So my first MS symptom was in August 2003. I lost vision in my right eye, and it was really, really weird. It was about 75% of my vision, and it lasted for a couple of months. And it's called optic neuritis. And I started doing the research, Google Med and all that stuff, which is really it can be your best friend and your worst enemy. But I learned after doing the research that I had an extremely good chance of getting an MS diagnosis because it's the most common presenting symptom. So people talk a lot about going through the stages of grief when you're diagnosed with a disease or, like cancer or anything like that. Yeah. So really after that issue was when I started going through that process, because I just kind of had a feeling in my gut that MS was the way it was eventually going to go. So over the next 2 years, I started paying attention to every single little neurological symptom. And because I was on active duty, I knew that if I wanted to get a medical retirement with medical benefits and a pension and things like that, that it had to be very, very well documented because, military medicine. Yeah. Eventually I started getting more symptoms. I would start getting some numbness and tingling in my legs and stuff. And after I got the diagnosis, it wasn't a huge surprise because I kind of knew it was coming. I was able to start on my treatment right away. But then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, I've been in the Air Force for 8 years. I had planned on maybe staying in longer. I had just gotten married. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm trained to be a federal agent with a badge and a gun. And physically speaking, I know I'm not going to be doing this for, I can't do this for, who knows how much longer. I was still walking at the time. I could still run and dance and do all that stuff. But because I had been working in counterintelligence and in counterterrorism analysis and things like that, I was able to get a job. Thank goodness. My ex-husband had been transferred to Northern California, and I got a job as a contractor with the state of California doing intelligence analysis. It just, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So that kind of started me into a new career. But still, it was, psychologically, it's kind of a shift, because with MS, you just don't know how you're going to progress, what part of your body it's going to affect, and how fast it's going to progress. So and to this day, my progression has been slow, but you constantly go through the grieving process, because each time you lose the ability to do something, you just go through it all over again, and you still have to deal with it, even 16 years later. So.
Yeah, for sure. I actually never really knew a whole lot about multiple sclerosis until meeting you and learning all about that. And so I guess, how are you doing now? Have you remained pretty stable? Or, what changes have you seen, I guess, in the past few years?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I've been on treatment that my body has responded to very well. I'm actually starting a new treatment in the next few weeks, because the treatment that I've been on, you can only be on it for so long. It starts to have certain effects on your body that make a potentially lethal side effect more likely. So eventually you have to transition. So fortunately, now that I've been vaccinated, because I've been on what's called an immunomodulator that just kind of changes how your immune system works, to now this new medication is an immunosuppressant. So it makes my immune system weaker. And because of coronavirus and everything, I've been very hesitant to switch. But now that I'm fully vaccinated, I'm ready to kind of switch. My progression is still going. Thank goodness, it's been extremely slow. I have what's called secondary progressive MS, where instead of having relapses where you have an attack and then you go back to normal, have an attack, go back to normal, now it's just kind of a steady decline. In the last year and a half, 2 years or so, I've been slowly losing my abilities with my right hand. I have very, very weak grip. I can't hold a pen anymore. It's harder for me to open. Right now, being able to do this is really a miracle. My hand is starting to kind of clench up. So that's been really, it's been more psychologically difficult than physically difficult. I'm still able to drive, the knob that I use to drive and everything, but, lifting my arm is harder. I can't really wash my own hair very well. So I've been going to the salon for a few years now just to get my hair washed and blown out once a week. So that's been kind of challenging. And I learned how to become left-handed a few years ago with the help of my left-handed younger son. But that's been the biggest change. But still, it makes me wonder, okay, if I really only have one arm that's kind of really, truly functioning, how is that going to affect just my ability to open a bag of chips? Even opening a fortune cookie can be challenging. And I treasure my independence and living by myself and being able to do things, and travel, especially on my own. So that's why I'm trying to do as many things as I can while I physically still can, especially traveling. So yeah, it's not knowing what's going to come and how fast it's going to come is a big motivator.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. And so I know you mentioned, due to the coronavirus, you haven't been traveling as much as usual. You have visited, I think, 50 something countries.
57 total, 49 in a wheelchair. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. And so due to COVID, that's kind of changed a bit. But in the past year, you've done many other things. You mentioned that you're working on an animated short film. I know you've written some books. You wrote Blogging While Disabled and a book about cruising. So can you tell us what you've been up to in the past year since the pandemic started?
Sure. Another one of those pivots. I don't do well when I'm sitting at home doing nothing. It can be really, really depressing. I took my last trip, oddly enough, 1 year ago to this day, I was in Hawaii, in Honolulu. And I flew home on March 4th, right when all of this stuff was kicking off. I haven't traveled anywhere since. And I spent, I'm going to say, it was probably about 6 weeks or so where I really kind of fell into a mild depression. I'm used to not being home for more than a week or so. And I'm working constantly when I'm at home. And all of a sudden I'm like, I have nothing to do, nothing going on. And I just found myself sleeping really, really late and watching TV all the time and just not really motivated to do much. And it was really challenging. And I think a lot of America and a lot of the world was kind of in the same place. You know, we're all kind of mentally figuring out how to deal with all these changes. So I had been on the brink of signing with an on-screen talent agent in February. And she suggested that before they signed me, she wanted me to get more training under my belt. Because even though I've been in front of the camera for over a decade as a guest expert on cable news, and documentaries for the History Channel, even though it's being on TV, it's not acting, you know. So she wanted to make sure that I knew how to pretend how to be somebody else, which is, you know, what acting is. So I guess like May rolled around, June rolled around, and I said, okay, all of these acting studios, and especially one that I work with here in Orlando, have gone virtual. So I'm like, okay, let me sign up for some virtual acting classes. And I did one, and it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. And it seemed to be that I was decently good at it. And the same studio had a voice acting, I guess it was a seminar. It wasn't a class in that it was weekly, but it was maybe 4 hours. I said, okay, I've got nothing going on. Let me try it and see if I'm any good. And I did the class, and it seemed pretty easy. And I'm like, you know, I've been a public speaker for a long time. Let me give it a go. And I spent all of $99 on a microphone kit from Amazon. It was the microphone, the headphones, and a swing arm that I could attach. And I have a walk-in closet in my bedroom. And I said, okay, I can use this as my home studio. I said, let me give it a try. And I started auditioning the day after my class, and I booked my first job a week later. And then I booked another job and another job, and I upgraded my microphone, and then I kept booking jobs, and I finally upgraded my microphone again. And I started putting acoustic foam and acoustic tiles and stuff in my closet. And yeah, pretty soon I was getting jobs pretty regularly, and I did something like 30 jobs in 4 months, and I made more money with voiceover in those 4 months than I did with travel in like the previous year. So I finished my second book, the Blogging While Disabled: How to Make Money Writing from Your Wheelchair at Home. And now I'm at the tail end of my accessible travel memoir, which has been in the works for about 3 years, but it's just with travel and work and everything. Now is finally the time that I've been able to buckle down and finish it up.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds exciting, and I can't wait to see your memoir. And I'm glad, you know, you talked about traveling. I want to dive into that now. I mean, traveling is my favorite topic, of course. So,
of course.
We can talk about this all day, I know. But and you know, what I guess are some of your favorite travel experiences that you've had? You've visited 57 countries, and I know you've had many, but if you could only pick maybe 2 or 3 experience, what would your top ones be?
Well, cruising, you know, is my favorite way to travel. And we had a lot of fun, I think, talking on our in that clubhouse room that we talked in yesterday about cruising. And so, that was so much fun traveling with you and your mom on that cruise. I was going to do that Baltic cruise with my kids in June, but you know, the Rona.
Hopefully next year.
Hopefully next year. Yes. Gosh, I did a 12-night cruise with my best friend a few years ago. It was a round trip out of Rome, and we went to Greece and Italy. Not Greece and Italy. We went to Greece and Israel. And I know you've been to Israel a couple times, and that was really, really incredible. I did a 3-week kind of Asia tour, I guess you could say, or, you know, I did about 9 days in New Zealand, 5 days in Singapore, 5 days in Hong Kong. So I figure if I'm going to go all the way out there, and I figure I might as well make the most out of all of those places. And it was a really long trip, but Singapore is now one of my favorite places in the entire world for the accessibility, and New Zealand was phenomenal. That was a trip to Shanghai. That was surreal. You know, China is not necessarily the most accessible place, and the Chinese people are kind of a mystery. You know, the body language is hard to interpret sometimes, and because of their culture, people with disabilities. They kind of have a certain view of people who are disabled, and kind of tend to look at you a little strange. So I was very intimidated by going to Shanghai, but it was like, oh, Shanghai, the largest city in China and so modern. And I ended up just having a whole new view of the Chinese people. It was such a positive and incredible experience. And that's really what travel is all about. You know, anybody can go visit the Eiffel Tower, anybody can visit the Colosseum or the Great Wall or whatever. But what makes everybody's individual experience different, you know, from, 15, 50, 500 people that visit the Eiffel Tower is the people that you meet and the experiences that you have talking to the locals, and how people help open your eyes to the culture. And that's what really makes it a significant experience.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the best part of traveling, of course, like meeting all the people and experiencing that local culture. And you did not mention this, but I saw a few days ago on your Facebook that this was one of your favorite travel experiences.
Oh my gosh, that was so insane. Yeah. So I'm lucky to live in Florida. I have four of the largest cruise terminals in the country and even the world at my disposal within a few hours drive. And I found a really great deal on the Rotterdam, on the Holland America Rotterdam out of Tampa. And it did a Central America itinerary. And one of the places that it stopped was in Roatan, Honduras. And a girlfriend of mine went with me. Normally I travel by myself, but I was gonna pay the money anyway. And I'm like, hey, you want to come with me? It was very short notice. She's like, heck yeah. So I'm very fortunate in that I can transfer to a sedan, to a smaller taxi. I can't get into a minivan, but I can transfer in a sedan, and my power wheelchair breaks apart into 3 pieces. So if I can't find a tour that has an accessible van, then I have a little bit of flexibility, especially if I'm traveling with somebody else. So we found this tour in Roatan that went to an animal sanctuary. It's called like Big Mike's or Mike Johnson, or I can't remember the exact name, and I'm sorry about that. And so it's this animal sanctuary in Honduras, and they have some spider monkeys and a bunch of birds, and a lot of rescues. And they have these sloths, and they let you hold them. So fortunately, I was in a group, and they just take you in groups throughout the sanctuary, and it was actually accessible. I couldn't believe it. They had an accessible bathroom, and it was kind of small, but it was doable. And even the spider monkey cage, or it's an enclosure, whatever you want to call it, had a little ramp. It was a little dodgy, but a little ramp where you could go in. I couldn't believe it. So while other people were looking at the other animals, they kind of wanted me to be a little separate, so I would have some space. And they brought the sloth over to me, and that was only one of the 2 that I got to hold. I was the only one who got to hold both of them. So wheelchair privilege, as I like to call it. But yeah, and I got to hold this particular sloth longer than anybody else. And it was, they have these 2 really sharp claws, and the way that I was holding it, they were kind of digging into my shoulders, but I'm like, I don't care. I'm holding the sloth. And it was just, they moved so slow, and just kind of had this like smile on his face, and just kind of looking around, and it's just so calm and mellow. And it was just like, I didn't want to move. I didn't want to scare it. I didn't want to, I just didn't want to move it. It was just, oh my gosh, it was very like I'm holding a sloth.
Awesome.
It was incredible.
Sloths are like one of my favorite animals. And when I was in Costa Rica a couple years ago, I was able to see some sloths, but they were up in the tree, and I thought that was like the highlight of my life. So and that, like, holding one, I can't even imagine like how happy I would be.
It was, and now they actually do have an accessible tour in Roatan. I can't remember the name of it, but they do have an accessible van. So you're gonna have to take a cruise that stops there and take that tour and go out to that sanctuary.
Yeah, let me know the name of the company, and I will be booking a trip as soon.
I know, you'll be there. You'll be there.
And we've talked a lot about, the great travel experiences you've had, but I'm sure along the way there have been some not so great experiences. So are there any that stand out as, not so great, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, there are always the individual little spots that pop up, and people often ask, probably the best way to say, people often ask, well, are there any countries or any places you've been to that were just like not great? Yeah. Well, and it's not that it wasn't great. It's one of those places I never really have to go back. And I would say that was Romania. And I don't want to harp on it, because any travel experience, you get something out of it. It's always a learning experience. And I was there with a great tour company, really great people. And I would not have been able to see Bucharest or the other parts of Romania without them, because the accessibility is just, it's almost non-existent. And without being able to use their van and having a guide, it would have been impossible. But Romania itself, I mean, it's a former Eastern Bloc country, and the evidence of communism is everywhere. It's just, it's falling apart. It is absolutely falling apart. You know, the people are it's a hard people, but it's a hard life. You know, I learned all about the gypsy culture. There's a lot of poverty and hardship and a lot of contradictions in Romania and in Bucharest. Seeing the $2 billion parliament building that was built by Ceausescu, and seeing still the bullet holes in a lot of the buildings in downtown from the revolution and the end of communism. And it's a hard place. You know what I'm saying? It's just, there's a lot of heaviness there. But there's some beautiful places too. You know, Castul-Peleș, and going up to almost Transylvania, not quite there, but Shania and a lot of in the mountains and everything. So there's a lot of beauty there. But yeah, it was, you know, so I don't want to say that it's a negative thing, but it was still, you know, kind of heavy. You know, several hotel rooms that have been a disaster where I haven't been able to shower. Yeah, even a hotel room here in Fort Lauderdale. I didn't even have to go to a foreign country, where the manager ended up getting fired because he was so unwilling. I was paying almost $300 a night for a hotel room for a cruise conference, and they refused to help me out. And another manager had to go to another hotel 20 minutes away to get me a folding cot that had, the springs were coming through the mattress, but I had to sleep on that folding cot on the floor because I couldn't get into the 33-inch bed, and I still had to pay $300 a night. So yeah, that was.
I've been there, done that. It's, I think, one of the parts of accessible travel that not so glamorous. There are a lot of parts, including air travel, hotels. I mean, we could really talk about this all day, but
forever.
Yeah, one of your favorite ways to travel is cruising, and I think you've been on over 20 cruises, actually. So you're definitely a cruising expert. You're also a travel agent that specializes in booking cruises for people with disabilities. So why do you think that cruising is such a great way to travel for fellow wheelchair users? And can you tell us a bit about your book on cruising?
Sure. So I love cruising because cruise lines, especially the ones that have newer ships, realize that I think really of all the different travel sectors, they're the ones that recognize and value the money and the market the financial market that we represent as people with disabilities. So the accessibility on cruise ships, and especially the newer ships, is really quite good. I can't think of a cruise that I've taken, maybe one, and that was a really, really old ship, and it was a very, very cheap cruise where it wasn't great. But that was really the only one. All of the major cruise lines with the larger ships have all been super, super easy to navigate, and the accessibility. I've never not been able to take a shower on a cruise ship. Let's put it that way. Isn't that kind of the benchmark? You know, if you can't get to the bathroom or can't take a shower, that's kind of the hardest thing. So that's part of it, is the accessibility of the ship. And you unpack once, and that's your place for the 7 nights or 9 nights or 12 nights or whatever. So the accommodations make it easier. But also with cruises, you get to go to places that in normal circumstances would be entirely too difficult to fly there and stay there in a hotel and get around. So some people kind of like to bash on cruises by saying, well, you can't really experience a place if you're only there for 8 hours or 12 hours. And I get that, because I've been the kind of person to stay in a place for a week, and even a week sometimes, you know, isn't long enough. Yeah. But just to have a taste of that place and of the language and of the food, even if it's for 8 hours, I think it's better than nothing. So like, yeah, I went to Split and Dubrovnik and Rijeka in Croatia a little over a year ago. And Dubrovnik maybe, but Croatia is still a difficult place to visit as a wheelchair, especially for an extended period of time. So going there on a cruise and being able to have a taste of those, those 3 different cities, like a cruise is the best way to do it, and to have a guide who knows the accessible places you can go and the routes you can take. So yeah, and even like especially Central and South America, Cartagena in Colombia and Roatan in Honduras and in and Guatemala and all these other places, I definitely wouldn't be able to fly there and stay there for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And we do frequently hear, that cruising isn't an authentic way to travel. But I feel like, you can actually see a lot in a day. I mean, when we went on our cruise around Scandinavia and Russia, we really packed those days full. Like in Helsinki, we saw so much that day, in St. Petersburg. And
yeah,
I think it all depends on, the excursions and what exactly you want to do once you get to the ports of call.
Yeah, it's what you make it. It's what you make it.
Yeah, exactly. It's what you make it, just like anything else in life, I guess. But you also wrote a book on cruising. When did you write it? And can you tell us just a little bit about it?
Sure. And this was kind of an easy one to write, just because I had so much passion for cruising. And I've written, and you've written as well, so many different blog posts on accessible cruising. I'm like, why not put all of this material into one place? So everything you need to know about wheelchair accessible cruising. And really that's kind of what it is. And it's kind of from start to finish. What kinds of things do you need to know about what the cruising experience is like in general, and then narrowing it down to specifically what do you need to know about it as a wheelchair user? What kind of itineraries are best for wheelchair users, taking a look at itineraries that only stop at docks and you don't have to worry about tenders. You need to take a look at the ports of call. Are there accessible tours available? Is it a spot where you can just if there are no tours available, is it a stop where you can just get off the ship and immediately roll into town and be able to get around? Is there accessible public transportation that will help you get into town? So just kind of things like that, where wheelchair users need to have that extra amount of information. I also have a different chapter on most of the major cruising regions around the world. So if you want to go to Asia, what are your options there? If you want to do an Alaska cruise, what's that like? So I try to pack as much information there as I possibly could. And fortunately, it's kind of been a big hit. And anytime somebody asks about what it's like to cruise, I'm like, hey, just go to Amazon and check out my book for $4.99 on Kindle. And it'll take a lot less time for you to read it than it will for me to explain it to you. So.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. And so it is available on Amazon. If anyone wants to purchase it. And again, it's called Everything You Need to Know About Wheelchair Accessible Cruising. So I bought the book like a year ago when it first came out, and it's an amazing resource. Definitely has so much valuable information in it. So I would definitely recommend, if anyone's thinking about cruising, if we ever get through this pandemic and cruises open up again.
They will.
we will one day. And you're also a travel agent specializing in cruising. Is that correct?
Yeah. I used to do a lot more, pretty much anything that would come up. I would say probably 60 to 70% of my business with cruising. And then most of the rest of it was all-inclusive resorts, especially in Mexico and the Caribbean. But that became so challenging because unlike here in the United States, when you book an accessible room, by law, they have to guarantee that room so that when you show up, and even though it doesn't always work, when you show up, you're supposed to have the room that you asked for. And by law, they have to separate that room for you and guarantee that when you show up and you check in, that's the room that you get. But in Mexico and elsewhere in the Caribbean, many times it's a request and not a guarantee. So I was getting very stressed out and very uneasy that when my clients would show up at an all-inclusive resort that they had paid thousands of dollars for, because you have to pay in advance, you don't pay when you check out, that they would show up and the accessible room wouldn't be available, even though they said they had set it up, put in the request or set it aside. And even though I went down to Cancun and met with a lot of the reservation and the salespeople, and I was having some really great personal relationships that I could just email them and say, hey, I have a client coming in. Can you please set this aside? And that did work out. And I had many happy clients that would go down there to some of these resorts that I had personally visited and inspected. But it was just becoming too time intensive and too stressful. And I was like, you have to, especially when your time is limited and you have other things going on, it just made more sense for me to focus on cruising. Most of my business was coming from there anyway. And I have the most passion for it. And I have the most confidence in booking cruises now for my clients. So yeah, my travel agency has been quiet for the better part of a year. But I'm still kind of, I'm skeptical on the rest of this year just because it is what it is. But I think that with the vaccinations, with the plans that the cruise lines have in place for doing their test cruises and for mitigation as far as wearing masks and sanitation, definitely for 2022, I think we're going to be back on a very, very busy cruising season.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm going to be like the first one in line.
Yeah. Me and my kids will be right there behind you.
And what is your top tip for other travelers that use wheelchairs? Or if you can't think of just one, like top 1, 2, or 3.
Sure. Number one, definitely the most important is to do your research. And I will preface that by saying that it sucks that we have to do so much more work than other people, than non-disabled people. It really does. But it is what it is. You can either embrace it or stay home is kind of, how it works. So there's so much information that we have to find out to make sure that we have the best possible travel experience. Accessible and accessibility doesn't mean the same to everybody. And I've heard so many stories from people, especially in foreign countries, where they think they've booked an accessible cruise and they show up, or accessible hotel room, and they show up and they get to the hotel and they can't get in. And the manager or the clerk will say, like, well, it's only got 2 steps, it's accessible. Oh yeah. Are there steps to get up to the elevator? Crazy things like that. So making the phone calls, sending the emails, asking for the photos, it can be exhausting. So people have to decide, are you willing to go through that extra work or those extra steps? But you have to do the research, you have to do the homework, whether it's going through an accessible travel agent like myself, whether it's reading accessible travel blogs like Cory's, and to get those details. That's the best advice that I can give, is to make sure you know what you're getting into and that you're going to get the accommodations that you need to not only have a good time, but to feel safe and secure.
Yeah, I love that you made that point, because I think it's tremendously valuable to do all of the research beforehand, so that then, once you're there at the destination, you can just like relax and enjoy it, because everything's already figured out and organized and done with. So definitely better to do your research in advance, I think, as well.
Yeah. And it's also another thing that is really not great is that we often have to spend more money than non-disabled people for tours, for shore excursions. So if you're a budget traveler, it can be done. Okay, don't get me wrong. And I think both of us have blog posts on how to travel on a budget, but be prepared to shell out a little more money. And I think it's worth it to have that security, to have an accessible tour guide or book an accessible tour, not just a shore excursion, but even land-based. There have been many countries that I've been to that I would not have been able to explore by myself, where I have made really good friends along the way in my tour guides and tour companies that I love to be able to support in different countries, and their insight and their ability just to have an accessible van to get me from place to place and to know what routes to take. It is worth the money. Again, it stinks that we have to pay that much more, but it's absolutely worth it to have that help, because it just can open up so many more experiences to you.
Yeah, completely agree. I always love supporting companies that actually specialize in accessible travel, because they know what's accessible in the city, they organize it. And some companies that, like, I know Iceland Unlimited, which I think we both used.
Yes.
In Iceland, it's actually ran by a wheelchair user. So companies like that really make it so much easier to have an enjoyable time once we're there. But post-COVID, what is at the very top of your bucket list?
Seeing my kids. Okay. My 2 children live with their dad during the school year. I have them. I have them during the summer, and because their dad is stationed in Germany right now for the next couple of years, So I haven't seen them since they left me for the summer at the very beginning of last September. So we had planned on maybe doing something for spring break. It just kind of depended how things were going to go. And unfortunately, we had to cancel that. So we did have 2 cruises booked for this summer. That's not going to happen. So instead, when they come visit me for the summer, we're going to do a 5-week road trip to visit some national parks, head up to North Dakota and over to Glacier in Montana and to Yellowstone and stuff. So that's the first travel trip. And as far as going anywhere, it's as much time. Once I can start going back to Germany, I'll be spending as much time as I can traveling and hopping around Europe with them on long weekend visits, during the school year. So, I still have a couple places here and there that I'd like to go. And I'm glad I really just took advantage of the money I had saved and the time to knock off all the stuff on my bucket list in a foreign capacity. So now I don't feel as much pressure to go and visit all these places, and I can really focus on spending as much time with my kids. And man, they're such great travelers. They love to travel. They're great travel companions. They're old enough now where they can do most things for themselves. And I'm just dying to show them all of the amazing places that I've been to in Europe and just explore Europe with them.
Awesome. Yeah. The 5-week road trip sounds incredible. So I can't wait to follow along on that. But I guess the last question, can you please tell everyone how they can find and connect with you online? Where can we see your 5-week road trip adventure?
Sure. My accessible travel blog is the best way, and that is spin, as in spinning around, spin the globe. There it is, spintheglobe.net. And that's where you can find all my travel articles. And I also have links to to all of my books. I have 2 photography books, and then I have my cruising book and my blogging while disabled book. And there are links to those on Amazon. So that's the best way to find me and learn more about my travel experiences.
Awesome. And you're also on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere at Spin.
Everything. I'm on Clubhouse. You can always find me on Clubhouse, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. And I have links to all of those on my blog page as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me this morning and talking about travel and everything else related to traveling with a disability. So I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone learned something. I know I did. So yeah, thank you so much, Sylvia.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for watching. Thanks so much. We will be back in a couple weeks with a brand new Facebook Live with a new guest. So definitely stay tuned here on the Discover page. And can't wait to see you. Thanks, and have a great week. See you later.